Hi, and welcome to In the Zone. I'm the host, Ethan Moore. This show is meant to be a space for long-form conversations with various members of the baseball world. In this conversation, I go in the zone with the co-host of the Baseball Barbecue podcast and half of Cespedes Family Barbeque, Jordan Shusterman. Our conversation covered his unique experiences in baseball media, his philosophy of interviewing players, and much more. Questions are marked on the video and timestamped in the description for your convenience. I hope you enjoy our conversation. To start, how do you describe your job to a stranger?
Oh my goodness. That's a great place to start. I usually describe it as, well, it's easy now because we have a podcast and like podcasts are a more accepted like thing that people do, especially if you have a real audience. You could say like, yeah, I have a baseball podcast, and I'm very fortunate enough to be able to say that I have a baseball podcast on a very cool baseball podcast platform with The Ringer. So that's one thing. But in a normal season, when we're actually out and about and traveling and talking to players, I say I cover baseball and try to make people care about the people that play the game, more so than try to tell them what they should think, right? Or try to analyze. I don't consider myself an analyst. I do that for fun, but my job is to get people to be excited about baseball through talking to people around the game.
So, okay, it's kind of like marketing almost, the way that you're describing it, but it's more like, it's like you didn't study marketing. You're not a marketing guy. It's like organic marketing, right?
Sure. I mean, it all comes from a very genuine place. And that's where realistically, when we first stopped and we worked at MLB for the first couple of years after college, it was a natural fit because by nature, MLB wants to promote the game and we have those same goals. And wherever we go, we want to promote the game because we love baseball. It's not a corporate interest, right? It's not I want the owners to make more money. It's just like, I love this sport and I believe that I can get other people to love this sport. And I know that there are other people who love the sport like I do. And I just want to engage with those people as much as I can. And if I can bring in more people to be that way, then that's awesome.
Got you. I'm kind of getting like a baseball evangelist vibe.
Sure. And again, but it's also kind of knowing what you're going for, right? Because I think there is a lot of please like my sport energy in the baseball space, especially even from the MLB side, which I think sometimes comes across as desperate.
Yeah, absolutely.
For me, it's not about that, right? I'm not trying to act like baseball is not that it's maybe hopefully one day it will be the most popular sport in America again. I hope, but like I recognize that like football is number one, and I recognize that basketball is the one that's trending up. But that doesn't mean I have no hope for kids, our age or kids younger that do love baseball. I know they exist, right? And so it is tapping into them. It's not acting like, oh no, like, why can't we be like the NFL? Why can't everyone care about the people the way that they talk about the NBA? It's like, sure, it's easy to fall into comparing the two, but embrace the strengths that we have of our sport, right? And just trust that what we have in baseball is cool and is special, and don't worry about comparing. And so in that sense, it's not as much about necessarily trying to convert people away from another sport. It's more of just like trusting the product that you have and thinking that people are going to like it.
Gotcha. Very cool. So you and Jake Mintz, the other half of Cespedes Family Barbeque, started your career by doing a podcast when you were in high school, right? So at what point did you realize that, being a baseball evangelist or whatever you call yourself, was going to be like a viable career path?
I'd say pretty late in the game. I mean, right. We started the podcast right at the end of high school, really more like right as we were getting to college. And I think at that point, again, everything we were doing with our blog and on Twitter and with the podcast was very much for ourselves. And once we started to kind of get a couple thousand followers on Twitter and we realized that people liked the way we were talking about the sport, that was encouraging, but it was still a few years into school. And a few of the road trips that we took before we were really convinced, like, okay, like this is a real thing that we can do, because like we had to experience the going to a minor league game and having a positive experience with a player, right? And interviewing major league players even, right? I remember we were just talking about this the other day, actually, about how one of the first major league credentials we got was in Houston in 2014, I guess, 14, 15. And we got to interview Dexter Fowler with the Astros, and he awesome guy. And it was like we were talking about how like if he wasn't so nice to us and so accommodating, we might have been like, screw this, we're not good at this, right? But we had a lot of positive interactions in the early going. And because of that, we stuck with it, and we made enough connections. Something that was so crucial and has continued to be so crucial in our travels has been that we have connected with people in all forms of the game, right? So it's the players, it's the broadcasters, it's the media people, it's the beat writers, it's the team employee, it's like the front office person. Like we have tried to cover and have connections with every possible version of the baseball world. And that has allowed us a lot of flexibility and credibility to talk about these issues too, right? Because yes, we are just fans, but I think a lot of why we're good at what we do is because we're very educated in it and we have the experience to back it up. We can always relate to someone, basically anyone that we talk to in the baseball world. We have some nugget, anecdote, information they can relate to. And so that's really important too.
Yeah, you guys have mastered the art of the interview for people in baseball. When it comes to interviewing players specifically, players, as we know, are kind of their own breed of baseball person. What is your interviewing philosophy when it comes to players? What makes a good player interview, and what might make a bad player interview?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think, it's different at the major and minor league level. I think something that's always worked for us is, because players will always be able to relate to it, is the kind of disarming from the beginning, which is basically saying, hey, I don't care how your swing feels, because like that's what they're getting asked every day, right? And every time, especially in the majors, oh, you look great. What are you seeing out there? Oh, how's the fastball? Oh, like, you look like what's going on with your hamstring? It's so production focused. It's so, very kind of surface level baseball focus, to where they revert into auto. I know how to answer this because I've been asked this every day for the last 2 months. And so when you tell them like, I don't care about that, like tell me about you, right? Or like tell me what you like, who are you, right? That's the whole thing, is the players make the sport, the players make the league. And so yeah, there are boring baseball players, there are players that don't have much to give you, and you kind of feel those out. But at the same time, like, we've continued to be surprised in a positive way about the personality that is there, if you let them show it. And if you can make them feel comfortable, and you make them feel like their personality does matter, and the fact that they're not just a baseball player, and the fact that the baseball player in the baseball world is why we're maybe talking to them, but like what they can add is telling us about them more than the fact that they hit 280 in AA. And so that's really been a strategy that I would say has always worked, but it's so tough, and it's so different for every guy. And sometimes the guys are just better, and you just kind of got to get out of the way and let them talk. That's something that we still struggle with, I think, in our podcasting and stuff, is because, yeah, presumably people listen to the podcast because they want to hear us, but we also want to highlight the guest, right? We want to get out of the way and stop interjecting our answers, because it's like, no, it's not about us, it's about the player we're talking to. So that's a rambly version of the things that I care about when I'm trying to do a player interview.
Yeah, your guys' interviews are always very, very unique in that way, and I think people really appreciate that. So I mean, I'm a fan.
You've been listening to when they were bad, when the interviews were really bad. So I think you would know, of anybody, how much I think we've improved in that regard. Because I think the other thing is there's a balance between conversational and off the rails, right?
Yeah.
And there's some fun in just the kind of freewheeling it, right? But the problem is that, a lot of the time you only have so much time with them, right? And you want to be efficient with that time. And so even if you have 20 minutes, it can be fun to kind of go off and go on tangents, and that feels natural. But ultimately you want to be getting good answers, and you want to be learning stuff. And so if you really just let it loose, that's something I do think we've improved at, because in the early going, we'd have like a few questions, and then it would just kind of go crazy, as you know.
Yeah. As you alluded to, I have been listening to your podcast and following your work since I was probably a freshman in high school, and now I just graduated college. So that shows how long I've been around and been on this train. But yeah, I mean, you kind of touched on it, but my next question was going to be what have you improved at over time in doing what you do? You just gave one answer. How about another answer that's maybe a little bit different?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, again, something that away from just the interviewing, but I guess this is sort of related. But something that we never had any plans to really do was do stuff on camera, and we didn't go to school for broadcast journalism or anything, and so doing stuff on camera with Jake and doing video work, video interviews, or stuff where we're talking to a camera and trying to be efficient. That's something that we've improved. Now, we haven't got to do that a lot in 2020 for obvious reasons.
Mm-hmm.
But that's something I think we've improved on too, because we never had any formal training in that. That's just something that we've been fortunate enough to get a lot of reps in just because of the jobs we've been able to have lately, which has been very cool. But yeah, I'd say that's the kind of thing where we just feel a lot more comfortable kind of just existing on camera and making sure that we're staying kind of locked in, engaged with, the audience in a way that feels more, professional is maybe too much of a stretch, but I do like to think that at least the guys of yeah, they know what they're doing while also still maintaining the fact that it's like, no, they are still just Jake and Jordan. They just happen to have this show where they get to do this stuff. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, coming from your background of not having that, like you said, broadcast journalism or that kind of training in front of the camera, what's the largest audience that you've to date been in front of on like TV or I guess on the internet?
That's a good question. The two things that come to mind, I mean, we've done a few, like, we got to do a couple actual MLB Network hits, like
I
actual
remember that.
television, a couple years ago, and those were fun, like on MLB Central. And that definitely feels, especially since you have it's like a big, huge camera, right? And you're on the set. And even though when we were doing our work with DAZN on Change Up, we were at the MLB Network set all the time, being on the set with Lauren Jihadi or, Roflo or Mark DeRosa, and they say 3, 2, 1, boom, you're on TV. Like that does feel different, right? And so yeah, those times, and then this is kind of a specific one, but and again, I guess I don't know what really how big the audience was, but last year we did a live all-star show on I think on Twitter Live. It was like sponsored by Gatorade or something on the MLB Twitter, and that was probably the most challenging show we've ever done because it was literally live on the MLB Twitter with however many tens of thousands of people watching. And we were just on the field during BP, and it was like, oh, there's Brandon Lau. Like, we're going to get him. Like, we're going to interview. It was not like, okay, let's record this, and then we'll bank this, and then we'll edit it. And it was like, go, go, go. And then if there was no one ready, you had to ramble, and you had to talk, and you had to not curse, and you had to, and then there were times where it's like, we can barely hear, right? There's like hundreds of people around us, and we have our producer in our ear, and they're trying to tell us this. And that was the kind of thing where like having no experience with that was very hard, right? And we made it work, and we didn't have that many mistakes. And sometimes it's a situation where it's like you just got to take the training wheels off and hope for the best. And the fact that they trusted us was very, very, encouraging. But that's one that stands out as like I can't believe we did that. Not just because of the size of the audience, but because of the technical elements of the actual production.
Yeah, that seems very overwhelming and stressful. So I can only imagine how you felt at that time. But yeah, okay. So I'm going to shift a little bit and to talk about baseball media and kind of the landscape there. I'm curious what you've learned about the kind of baseball media universe since getting started that you may not have known before.
Wow, that's a good one. Yeah, so I mean, I'm more used to it now, but something that does somewhat separate me and Jake was that I was very much online for the few years leading up to when we started Cespedes Barbecue. So like I was very familiar with the baseball media space somewhat, but obviously being a part of it and actually going to games and being around other media members, it's really interesting, like the levels of baseball fan that exist within the actual media, because I think that there is maybe a misconception that the beat writers are sometimes are like always complaining, like, oh, I don't want to have extra innings. Oh, I don't want to have this. Like, oh, please, like, and I think like some of that is true, but like for the most part, people really freaking love baseball. Even the beat writers that are complaining about it, like it is their life and it is something that they do even want to go out of their way to keep talking about. And so while that is can kind of be part of the bit, is the like, oh my God, I'm grumpy, I'm this, I'm that. Looking at you, Ryan Divish. They do love baseball. And I think that that is something that comes across and would this year, as you know, we don't have the winter meetings this year. That's something we missed out on so much. But a week like that is always a great refresher on that. And that's something I obviously miss so much this year. So while there is a lot of inclination to have a lot of negative discourse, I would say, particularly in writing, people do love the sport. And while they want to see it get better, and that's another thing that like all the debates about what needs to be changed about it, uh, it all comes from a place that is, I would say, pretty genuine and pretty real.
It seems like to work in baseball, you almost have to love it. Like it's not really an industry that's like throwing cash at people to job.
Yeah, and that's the problem, right? I mean, that's such a huge flaw in terms of baseball media, but also just the sport, right? Is it's like, well, I can hire all these unpaid interns because people would kill to say they work in baseball, and so it's hard to. I don't know how you escape that dynamic because it's so personal, and if you have that opportunity, it's like, yeah, of course. I mean, how could I turn this down? But it's not fair because that's not how. It's not a healthy way to grow the sport. It's not like it's probably not a sustainable way, but that's kind of how it always is. And I think there's some very huge pros and very huge cons to that reality.
Yeah, for sure. You touched on the misconception in about baseball media people being like, no cheering in the press box, be a fan kind of thing. What's a misconception that people have about like content creation or like podcasting?
Mm-hmm. Hmm. That's an interesting one. I mean, I think that like, so our process has changed. Bill, what's your process? Like, it's changed a lot because our projects have changed a lot, right? So like when we were at Cut 4, we were expected to be writing pretty frequently. And so there's a lot of, it was much more of a purposeful, constantly trying to think and churn out ideas and maybe, churning out and producing ideas that aren't in its best form. But it's like, well, we gotta produce something.
Mm-hmm.
With the podcast, it's a lot more deliberate, and we try to make a point to make sure that everything is the best that it can be. But in terms of misconceptions, I don't know. I think that's it's really tough to say. And again, like I try to think back to how we were doing things in a normal season, where we're doing a lot more than just the podcast, and the process of those videos or those interviews or those written pieces. And it's hard. It feels like a lifetime ago. And so hopefully I'll be back to doing more of that in 2021 and kind of remember what that process is like. But it's kind of hard to say right now, to be honest.
Gotcha. I mean, one misconception that I think people might have, and sometimes I kind of fall into, is like, I see baseball barbecue pop up in my feed for an hour, 90 minutes a week. And that's really exciting, but it's like, it doesn't seem like you're working that much, right? It's like, these guys are working for an hour a week because I'm only listening to them for an hour a week. But like, how much work goes into a week's worth of podcasts?
Sure. I mean, again, it's a lot of it is just scheduling, and of course, huge credit to our amazing producer Bobby Wagner, who does the heavy lifting on all this stuff. But yeah, I mean, during the season, I would say too, especially the podcast we did before the year when we first launched the show, when we did the themed episodes, we did the Brawls episode, the Home Run Derby episode, like that was a lot of work. I mean, those were ones where we were really planning and making sure we were being fairly comprehensive in terms of the research, in terms of the preparation. When we're just doing a pod that is more reacting to the weekly news, there's a little bit more flexibility there because, it's just like, all right, what do you think? But I can tell you that especially as we, move on during this off season, we're trying to get a little bit more ambitious, doing more podcasts that kind of have more purpose and intention. And we have some ideas that I think you in particular will very much like, and that we have kind of in store that we've just started talking about to try try to make happen this offseason. So we'll see. But yeah, I mean, I'd be lying if I said it's a 40-hour work week, but it's certainly more than the one or two that you end up hearing.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, you piqued my interest, and we'll circle back to that for sure. But real quick, I want to ask, as a podcast creation professional, what are the relative pros and cons of making a podcast versus some of the other forms of content creation that you've had some experience with in the past?
So I think, I mean, this is true of every kind of form of interview that we've now been relegated to, which is, Zoom, which is still, like, I still think we've been able to produce a lot of good stuff this year, but there's nothing like the actual interaction with the player. And like, just the nature of, like, and I'm talking specifically about, talking to players, right? But like, it's great to, when we get a player on Zoom, or it's like, okay, yeah, we're gonna, talk a little bit before we start recording and try to get to know them quickly. But it's so much easier in person, and it's so much easier to just like establish that rapport really quickly. Same kind of thing, like I said before, like we tell them, like, look, we don't care about this, we don't care about this, we just want to talk about this, we want to ask you a few things about this, blah blah blah. So that is similar no matter where you're doing it. But it's just not as natural. And I think too, like, on Zoom, like, it's hard. How do you differentiate yourself too? Right? Like, players that's logging on to do Zoom interview is going to expect you to be the same thing, and you have to earn that. You got to make it different. You got to make it feel different in the questions that you're asking, the way that you say it. Because another advantage of being in person is, like, generally, and I mean, it's not as true anymore because there are a lot more people that are our age that have already busted into the media space, whether it's Fabian Ardaya or Robert Murray or June Lee, guys that are our age or even younger. And like, that's awesome. That's good. That's what I want to see, of course, right? We want more people our age. But for a while, especially when we were in college, it was like, oh, those two guys are clearly younger than all the other BBWA old farts that are here. So it's a lot easier to be like, oh, they're different. Oh, I remember them. Oh, and so that's an advantage too. And I'd like to think we still have that to some degree, but it's harder to differentiate yourself in that regard. Because it's harder to really establish that over this medium. So in terms of the podcast, yeah. And just in terms of ambitious ideas, like, we could just come up with more ridiculous bits, right? Like we did, like, I remember last year too, we did so many cool videos at Cut4. We did the sunflower seeds Olympics with the D-backs, or like we came up with all kinds of stuff, like, where it's just like, okay, well, obviously you can't do that just through a conversation. And so just the ceiling's always higher when you can that was true for our entire minor league trip, all this silly stuff we got to do. So there's just a much, much higher ceiling for the kinds of videos you can make.
Okay, cool. If you had to kind of put into a sentence or a couple sentences, your kind of philosophy of why people should be interested in baseball, like if you were, to have a meeting with Rob Manfred, what would kind of be a couple of the few key points that you would want to emphasize about, like, these are the strengths of baseball, and this is why, this is what, the league should emphasize for more people to be interested in the game?
Sure. I mean, it's a slightly different conversation in terms of how I'm pitching it to Rob versus how I'm pitching it to the average
Sure.
person. But maybe it should be the same thing, right? You could argue that it's like, listen, this is what matters. So listen up, right? And I could see it both ways. I mean, the things that I always say, and the things that I, again, why I remain optimistic, even when we like to be doom and gloom in baseball, there's a lot of reason to be doom and gloom. And there's a lot of things that are broken and need to be fixed in terms about the structure of baseball and the relationship with the owners and how baseball teams view, competing and versus making money versus all that's totally true. But like, the thing I always say is that we've already seen so much progress in the let the kids play era, I would say. And I think that is something that it's just like, okay, yeah, bat flips are not going to save baseball. That's not what I'm saying. But there is something about the people who are the face of that sport and who are having a good time and who love baseball and view it as both a job that you can be really freaking good at and also something that you can outwardly enjoy. When those guys are the faces of the league, and those guys are in charge of the clubhouse, and I'm talking about the Lindors, the Acuñas, and the Sotos of the world, when they're not the hotshot rookies and they're the guys who are in charge, everyone's going to want to be like them. And that makes a huge difference because like you have an entire generation of players like Mike Trout who just want to be Derek Jeter, and that's fine. But there's a limit to how exciting that's going to be. And I love Mike Trout, and I don't need Mike Trout to be any different. We don't need Mike Trout to change. It's fine, right? It's okay. We have a lot of other amazing players, and so to answer your question, I would embrace expression. I would embrace youth, and I would embrace the global nature of the sport. That's something that I think is so cool about the NBA that I feel like they almost don't uh, emphasize as much as maybe they could. The fact that so many of the young, amazing players in the NBA are global. And I know that is maybe it's backwards because the average American baseball fan is, a conservative, whatever year old, and is just like, I love America and I want to root for, Americans. But I think that that's something to embrace. And I think that the younger, as we've seen, not just in embracing other baseball in other leagues or in other parts of the world, but when those cultures come and do exist in MLB, which is the best baseball in the world, I think that's so cool. So embracing the fact that you have just these unbelievable mishmash of developmental stories. You have the no doubter has going to be a major leaguer since he was 5, Bryce Harper's of the world. And then you have, other guys on the roster where it's like here, you'll like this shout out DJ Johnson, who was like working in a lumber yard and then suddenly gets the call and suddenly he's in the majors like 12 months later. And it's like, what, how the F did that happen? Okay. And so you kind of take all these and you look, and that's something that every time I watch literally any baseball game, something the coolest thing in the world is the batter pitcher matchup, right? That's the whole thing is you have two guys squaring off. And all the time, I just think about like, wow, here is this guy facing this guy. Like that is always, and just take those two stories, right? And whenever Bryce Harper is facing, Brandon Lee Brandt, who's a random Marlins rookie who comes to mind, who like was literally pitching in the weirdest levels of indie ball during the pandemic. The Marlins sign him and have him pitch like 2 weeks later. Like that's crazy. That's a crazy. And so all those matchups, when those things like collide, and it happens thousands of times every day, that's a great way and why I love the sport and why it'll never get old, because those things that are constantly mixing and matching are always happening. We're always getting new stories colliding. And I love that. I know a lot of that's more niche than the average fan cares about, but I just wish we would embrace the people playing and trust that they will carry us. And this generation is going to be very healthy because these people do still love baseball.
Yeah. I mean, that's very, very interesting because like there are so many stories, and like every player has a story that's fairly interesting, some more than others. But it takes some education for fans to actually hear those stories, right? Unless they're seeking them out, which is maybe what like very, very like intense fans are going to be doing. But the casual fan doesn't know these stories. And as soon as they learn them, then maybe they can start to appreciate them. But I feel like that's kind of the crux of people's argument that like MLB should be marketing players. And it immediately goes towards Mike Trout, who like isn't that interesting a person, and like his story isn't that crazy. Like he was just like amazing from basically day one.
Right.
But MLB could definitely focus on marketing the stories of the players, not just or not just like what shoes the player is wearing.
Right. It's just like, oh wow, like here's the thing: the part where it's like we'll let them wear whatever socks they want, like. Yeah, that should be obvious. Like that should not be like we're marketing the players. Like, sure, that should be the most no-brainer. Let's allow this to happen. Like that should be the bare minimum, right? I will also say that like, and I know this having worked at MLB, but also just knowing that like we are so quick to crush MLB for everything, but like they have gotten way better at this. And it is something that they have pushed the game, not just through the social channels, but through the things. And yeah, there are a lot of hits and misses along the way, and that's fine. But like they are trying and they are doing a good job with like, I can think of a lot of examples of that where it's, they are, trust me, like they are trying, but there's a lot of versions where it's still, there's so many strides to be made. But to your point, it is about that level of education, and that's fine. And I think that's something that we're pretty good at. And that's something that we strive to do, is especially on Twitter, when you only have so many characters, is to efficiently deliver that information and have you remember that player because, oh, he was this guy. Oh, he came from this country. Oh, he went through this weird form of adversity and now he's a major leaguer, right? That was a huge part of doing the MLB debut thread all season, right?
Yeah.
That was something that was a great example of that, where it's like, all right, how can I convey that this person's a major leaguer? Maybe he'll be a 5-time All-Star. Maybe you'll never see him after this. But the point is he's now entered the major league universe, and here's a few things that you should maybe care about.
Very cool. Shifting gears a little bit, I kind of want to circle back to some of Cespedes Family Barbecue's grand ambitions. I'm wondering, what would you guys do if you had like unlimited resources, unlimited time? And then if you could give me a little bit more information about what you guys have planned coming up.
Sure. So yeah, that's a great question. I mean, like, right, what would we, if we were fully our own bosses and just like going for it, what is the kind of stuff we want to create? We definitely want to be back out on the road again. I think something that, the events that we love the most are, the certainly, prospect related stuff like futures games, one of my favorite things too. But Little League World Series is an amazing form of baseball that we would love to just be a part of and experience, and Omaha, right? And like the Junior College World Series and like, stuff like that. Like just like the best forms. Well, obviously now KBO. I mean, my goodness, like get to Korea and go see a KBO game. Koshien. Oh my goodness. If you've never seen the Koshien documentary, the ESPN Koshien documentary, one of the most incredible films, I've ever seen. Knowing that there's so much more baseball beyond MLB is so great. And just exploring all those things. But like, I would love to get to do more content with players away from the field. And that's something we've had a little bit of experience doing. The best one that we got to do was probably thrift shopping with Taylor Trammell in the Arizona Fall League, which was so much fun. And that was so fortunate because Taylor's just like the nicest dude in the world. So he was a very willing participant. But stuff like that, where it's just like, let's just go hang out and like, let's just experience these guys when they're not in uniform, I think is something that we would love to be able to do too. But boy, I mean, it's tough to know what the list goes on. But in terms of our next podcast ambition, I don't know if I want to reveal it. Maybe I'll tell you when we're not recording, but it is a good idea. And we're just starting to kind of build the bones of it. So
okay.
But yeah, it's good. It's good. It'll be a fun kind of it's not quite the themed, when we did our themed episodes, we kind of did the whole comprehensive review. Talk about the best 2-sport athletes ever, the best home run derbies ever, and we reviewed the history of them. And this is a little bit more direct and more specific, but will encompass an entire podcast episode, and will hopefully involve multiple guests, and we'll include some pretty fun conversations. So I'll hold off. Maybe I'll tell you after we're recording. And again, I don't know when we're going to execute this, so hopefully at some point this off season.
Okay. Well, people will be very excited to be guessing what it is.
I gotta do something, man. I'm so bad. I feel like I usually give away too much information on these, but it's fine. It's good.
Yeah. All right. So now that your podcast has made it big time, or at least big time to where you started, what's something that you kind of miss about the days when it was just you and Jake, and who knows how many, not that many listeners,
right?
From when you started out.
Yeah, I don't know. Part of me is like, damn, like, wish we could still do these certain emails, or wish we could still do, this kind of podcast topic. But part of it that I'm so grateful for is, and part of just the whole development, the whole story of what we've been doing, is just like, you know what, like that was that, and we did it, and it was great, and I'm glad we did it when we did it, and I don't want to do it anymore. Like, I don't want to do that version anymore. Like, it's fine. Like, we got to do it and it was great. And the people that followed us then and listened to us then, like, experienced that. But, you can't just pretend like you're going to recapture. And I think that's something too, that we eventually accepted about everything that we were going to do once we graduated college and stopped doing the Barbercast. Is like, yes, we want to do things for ourselves because we know that's the best stuff. With the sense being that like all of our best stuff is stuff that we want to do, and stuff that comes from a place of like, we care about it and we want to do it. Right. As opposed to like, hey, you guys got to do this assignment, or like, hey, you guys got to go cover this, or you guys got to go write about this. So in that sense, that's still important. At the same time, it is probably irresponsible and not helpful for anybody if we're completely ignorant of our audience or the fact that we have a larger audience, because that'd just be selfish and it's not really fair. And so I think it's important for us to adjust in that regard. And I think we've done that. It took a couple of years. I mean, we were kind of stubborn, where it was like, no, we just want to keep doing what we do because that's what works. But there's a level where you can kind of find that middle ground where it's like, yeah, we're still the same people, but we're also kind of widening the tent at least a little bit to where more people are willing to come in with us, as opposed to being like, what the F am I listening to? Right. It's like, because while, the terrible editing and sound quality and unpredictable nature of the Barbacast was funny and endearing, like at some point you are probably pushing people away. Right. And so if we are now able, like, again, when we started doing, because we took a couple of years off from podcasting. And so when we first started doing Baseball Barbecue and Bobby was producing, like now I don't listen to all of our own episodes, although I do try to. Just listening to it, just be like, oh my God, sounds great. It's like, wow, we have real mics and real transitions and music and ads. And it's like, that's cool. Like, but that's fine. Like I have no shame with the podcast sounding good, like that's good. We should embrace that. And so that's the kind of thing where it's like, listen, it's still us and we're still having sort of the same conversations, but there's no shame in upping the production quality.
Sure. And if people still are hankering for that kind of raw level, they can watch the Cespedes Family Breakfast.
That's true. Our Instagram live still is about as raw as you can get, and you can still go back and listen to the Barbacast. I have not taken it off the internet yet. Maybe I should. Probably should have, but
please don't. I was listening to episode 100 in preparation for this.
Oh wow! Oh my goodness! I can only imagine what we sounded like then. I mean, yeah, there's some episodes I still go back and listen to. But I was thinking about it today because it's Carlos Rodon's birthday, one of our first big guests. So
yeah.
Thinking, boy, it's been we've both been through so much since he first appeared on the show. So
yeah, geez. All right. So as someone who has almost paved their own path in baseball, it's not like, there aren't really people that have done exactly what you've done that you could kind of look up to. On your journey here through your career. Who are some people that you look up to in baseball or even outside of baseball professionally?
Yeah, wow. So, I mean, I've said this is no secret, but Jeff Sullivan is a huge reason why I became a Mariners fan, and I just started following baseball writing and whatnot. And so yeah, like the Mariners media community, of course, Meg Rowley is a big part of that. And, more recently, Kate Pruser, John Troopman, all those people have been so great as terms of welcoming me into weird Mariners fandom. We don't have to go into that, but yeah, I mean, all the people, of course, in their early podcast days, like, I don't know if you listened to Up and In with Kevin Goldstein and Jason Parks, but that might've been maybe, I guess if you were listening to us, then they would have been a little bit before you, before your time. But I mean, that's one that, of course, is referenced by many people. That's a Mike Farron is another one, not just because he then did the sequel podcast to that, but he's someone that in the baseball media, MLB Network radio space, who has taken us in as a baseball uncle of sorts. And as much as we give each other a lot of crap, he's been incredibly supportive and great. And then honestly, like more recently, this is kind of a weird one because now he's like a good friend, but Jason Benetti is amazing for so many reasons. But I actually called Jason. This was a few weeks ago, and just to talk about how this is something I'm so jealous of, and you're doing a very good job of this, to be honest, is short interview questions. I suck at this. This is something I a lot of rambling, a lot of context setting, and something that Jason is so good at. And this is true in his post-game interviews. This is true when he's interviewing draft picks on Zoom. This is true when he's doing longer form stuff with White Sox players. He's so direct and so just like, boom. And it's so smart because the point is that like, you just have to freaking answer it. And the longer you talk and prepare your question, they're preparing their worst answer. And if you just hit them with the question, and you've done this to me, this is good. This is impressive. And I told him, I said, I'm very jealous of that quality. But Jason is someone who, in terms of player interaction too, I just think he's so incredible. And just in terms of, broadcast awareness and broadcast presence, not just in terms of calling games. I don't aspire to call games, but there's so much to learn there too. But oh my God, I mean, there's so many people. Like I know there was some Twitter discussion recently. So I think it was Matt Eddy that maybe from Baseball America that tweeted like who inspired you. Um, there's this, Sam Miller, of course. My God, I hope he gets another gig. But there's so many people in the writing space, and even though I haven't been doing as much writing lately, I like to think that they've inspired me. But no, it is weird. I mean, like it's not like we followed any sort of path, so we still made of it what we could. We made it very much on our own accord, but that's not to say that people have not helped us out along the way.
For sure. All right, I'm going to take a question to ask a little bit of a more personal question. We know that Jake has a lot of non-baseball interests. He's most recently getting very into biking or cycling, I should say.
Yes. Oh, don't call it biking. Yes. No.
I'm sorry, Jake.
No, you're right. No, you're right. You're right. Yeah. Okay.
Well, for you, what are a couple of your interests outside of baseball?
See, this is the thing. This is where I just end up looking so incredibly lame because I spend way more time on baseball stuff when I'm not doing baseball stuff for work than I should or anyone else does, right? So like I just don't get sick of it. So like I'm constantly just working on side random projects just for my own enjoyment. But in terms of other interests, I mean, this is not as relevant anymore, but in high school I directed shows like musicals and plays. So that's something that maybe a lot of people don't know about me, that I directed multiple musicals and plays in high school. So there's one. So I still have an affinity for that. Like that's what you'll find me singing in the car to a lot of the times if I'm driving many hours and I'm not on the phone with the baseball person. so yeah, I mean, that's something that definitely separates me from Jake. Is an interesting musical, but there's TV shows that I get into. Game shows I'm very into, especially this year. We're all just sitting on our ass and watching a lot of TV. Food Network, crush Food Network, even though I suck at cooking, completely incompetent, but I could watch Chopped and beat Bobby Flay just all day long, like Bobby Flay, just on repeat, just all the time. So that's definitely up there. And then the show that I'm currently watching, which is, and whatever, I'm not into Game of Thrones, no interest in that, but Fargo, currently watching Fargo. And that has been tremendous. On the recommendation of, here's a unnecessary humble brag, of Dodgers prospect Josiah Gray, who I'm friendly with. Awesome guy. He was like, you got to watch Fargo. I was like, sure, whatever. I got nothing else to do. Sounds good. So that's been keeping me away from baseball. But in terms of actual interests and beyond, I mean, listen, I should probably find some more. It's really the answer.
No, we learned a lot about Jordan in that question, I think. I remember on the Fangraphs winter meetings virtual cocktail hour that you guys were.
Oh, yeah.
That's when I first learned that you have a bunch of random projects going on at all times. Have you considered publishing those under a pseudonym like that?
Well, just to the thing is that like I probably could find someone to write for. Maybe that's obnoxious and arrogant. I'm sure I could find a place to do that. I don't know. Like there's something that I view of a lot of this more as my own, just like staying sharp. And it's just kind of how I stay on top of things. And that's like, it's projects like those that keep me, abreast of just like names in baseball. And just like, I know when I'm watching the Rule 5 today, it's like, oh, well, I recognize 95% of these names because they've shown up on some spreadsheet that I did for fun for some reason. Right. And that's just something I care about. That's just me wanting to be educated and informed and prepared, and not wanting to be caught off guard. And just like, I want to be able to answer when someone wants something to know. And I want to have the knowledge to bring something to the table when something in the baseball world happens. And that's just why, like Jake and I both, Jake even more so, but like why we want to bring this Lee Dome stuff, not just because the highlights get retweets, because it's just like, this is cool baseball. And like, if we have the ability to share it with people, we want to do that. That's why I wake up for KBO, because it's like, this is cool. And I think that you people will enjoy it. And we've made our whole freaking Twitter career off of that. And so I'm not going to stop that. So it really just comes from a place of wanting to stay in the loop and wanting to stay prepared and wanting to stay, because that's what it is. I'm not getting paid for tweeting about any of this stuff, right? This is just part of it. Comes from, I want to share with people. I want people to experience that. And so that's really where all it comes from. I mean, some of these projects are pointless. Some of these things are, I'm tracking things that nobody cares about. But like, but then other times it's like, oh, like that's something that it's like, oh, well, I've looked into that before, or I've done the research for this, and then when this happens, I can go cross-reference it with something. So yeah, there's a bunch of random stuff, kind of constantly just kind of have shuffling through. It's not nearly as advanced as the work that you do, but like not even close. So it's a little bit lower level, but it is something.
Whenever I see like a crazy fact coming from the Cespedes Barbecue Twitter account, like I'm usually pretty sure that it's you. If it's coming out of left field, I'm like, that's Jordan. He's been working on that one for a while.
Yeah, I mean, right. Sometimes it pays off, right? Sometimes you're just ready for something when other people aren't, because you've for some reason been thinking about it. And that's extremely dorky, but I don't really care. Like it's paid off, and as long as it continues to pay off in that regard, then I'm not really going to change. So,
yeah, cool. All right, we're getting close to the end here. We're gonna do some quick hits. All right. Quick questions, 3 quick answers. You down for that?
Yeah, sure. This is something that I know we first started experimenting with Mel Rojas Jr. on Baseball Barbecue, so I'm ready to be on the receiving end.
All right, sweet. Number 1, who's one person in baseball who you want to interview the most if you could choose?
Barry Bonds.
Wow.
Probably impossible. The thing I would think about with Barry Bonds is like, if for some reason he would let us interview and just be like, all right, Barry, like I literally don't give a shit what you did. I just want to talk about all of these home runs. Like which of these home runs, whatever. Anyway, that would be my answer.
Like Barry Bonds, like you and Barry Bonds breaking down his BREF page.
Yes, exactly. Basically just be like, all right, like which of your stats are you like, wow, that's hilarious. I was so amazing. Like basically leaning into the Baseball Reference page, or leaning into the, how many was it? 37 splash hits. I'm not sure exactly the number, like something like that, like really going deep into just be like, listen, I'm not going to ask you. It's not even about legacy. We're not asking about the Hall of Fame. Like, I don't care. Like you performed the best baseball ever. So let's just talk about that. That's what
there's a chance that he doesn't even care or like know about his like record, 1,400 single season.
Right. Like which of his records does he know about? Like, does he like, and honestly, we could just go 100. We could just do, 20 hours on intentional walks. Like, I don't even have to talk about the home runs.
Exactly.
So yeah, there you go.
Awesome. Well, I hope that happens someday.
Someday.
Cool. All right. Number 2, what's your favorite or one of your favorite running jokes from the Barbacast, or from, your early days creating content?
Man, I mean, we have some from like the BREF battles that we still reference all the time. Sometimes not even publicly. This is like a super deep cut, but there was oh my God, I don't even remember who it was. I think it was, oh fuck, I can't remember who it was. I'm gonna like butcher my own reference, so now I'm totally gonna screw it up. But there was some Baseball Reference, some player from like 120 years ago, and all I remember about the quote, or about like his nickname, I think it was Bird. It was something bird related, and the quote about him explaining why it was his nickname was, it was like something something something, and then it was like, oh, he's a bird, that's what he is. And for some reason that always struck us, and we will always say now, whenever it's like something is like becomes apparent, we'll just be like, that's what he is. It's a bird, that's what he is. It's like, what that doesn't make any sense. Anyway, that's when it comes to mind. Man, okay, other super duper inside jokes that come to mind. Wow, I mean, there's a lot. In terms of Barbacast stuff, oh my goodness, I don't know. There's some stuff from like Oh my goodness. The book that Jake wrote, The Boy Who Never Gave Up, or The Kid Who Never Gave Up, whatever.
Yeah, that's
That's one that
iconic.
we reference all the time. The part in the story, spoiler, where Carlos gets the call to go to the World Series, to go play in the World Series, and Frank Robinson calls him and says, "We need you for Game 7 of the World Series," and then Carlos goes, "I'll be there. Bye." so we'll do that too. We'll just be like, "Hey, we need you for Game 7 of the World Series. I'll be there. Bye." Yeah, so there's a bunch from that, and then like there's stuff that comes up from when we did the fantasy draft with Carlos Rodon. A lot of quotes from that still stand out to me, like Carlos when he was on auto draft and he was like he couldn't figure out what was going on and he screamed like, "I can't read." And it was like that was something I remember very well. So yeah, dude, I mean, this amount of time I've spent with Jake and all the things that we've experienced, I mean, you can go on and on and on. So
Yeah, too many to count, but those are some
too
good.
many to count. Too many to count.
All right, but speaking of running jokes, my third quick hit here. What's more likely? Jake completes the 1,000 pitch bullpen. Jake eats a baseball.
Ooh.
These are two things that Jake has contemplated doing publicly, and to my knowledge, has not done either yet. So, which is more likely?
I think the 1,000 pitch bullpen, just because his mom has been so hard pressed that she will not let him eat the baseball under any circumstance. But he is obviously less than a year removed from Tommy John. And while I have thrown with him a couple times recently, he would have to get to a place where he was feeling very good and, was somehow throwing pain free to the degree where it felt like it was at all reasonable or safe for him to throw 1,000 pitches, even at like 80%.
Sure.
So barely leaning 1,000 pitch bullpen, because I could see him, even though I think he would say eat a baseball, because I think he would say like, I'd almost be safer to eat a baseball than to throw a 1,000 pitch bullpen after having Tommy John surgery.
Yeah.
But again, like it's been one of the few things that his mom's been like, no, we're really not going to let that happen.
Got you. And I think the idea of the 1,000 pitch bullpen happened way before he needed or had.
Oh yeah.
So that changes the equation a lot.
For sure. Yeah, no, that's a great point. Yeah, no, I think that's the likelihood has fluctuated for sure over time.
Got you. And both of those are probably less likely than the biking to Chicago, the most recent addition to the Jake promising to do something.
Right.
Saga.
Right. No, the bike to Chicago, we really do intend on. He really does intend on completing. But I also think it's worth noting, the whole bike to Chicago. I mean, this will affect my life rather dramatically as well.
How so?
Because someone's going to have to drive along when he needs to, there's going to be some caddying element to this that is not going to be particularly fun, right? So, again,
it doesn't have to be you. I mean, you could.
That's true.
Hire an Uber to drive next to.
That's true. That's true.
But
now, again, I'm not saying I don't want to be a part of it at all. But
yeah, you're a good friend.
To a degree, it doesn't seem totally fair to have me roped into some of the crappier parts of this. I mean, obviously, I'm not the one biking, of course. That's what we're about. But like from it's still, because think about it, like, yeah, the biking is terrible, but also the driving to wherever in Indiana and waiting 6 hours for Jake to show up, that doesn't sound fun, right? So there's parts of it that aren't as good anyway. So we'll see, whatever. Hopefully we can make that happen in 2021 safely.
Yeah, I'm hoping for that too. I didn't really realize the extent to which you were going to be inconvenienced by by that comment.
Honestly, I still don't know the extent to which, but I just wanted to make sure that that's clear.
All right, Jordan, I have one more question for you. It involves the future. What do you think that you, personally, will be doing 5 years from right now?
Oh my goodness, I don't know, man. If my girlfriend was watching, she'd be like, "Better figure that out." But I don't know, man. I think I think, you thinking back 5 years ago, I mean, all the things that we've been able to do in the last 5 years has been more than we could ever imagine. And that's something that is very fortunate about in terms of what we'll be doing. I mean, who knows? It's changed so many times for so many reasons, even in the last 2 years, that it's hard to say. I hope that in some capacity, I'm still talking to Jake about baseball, but who knows? We're gonna have a very interesting couple of years in baseball coming up. I'm optimistic that we'll get through it one way or the other. But man, 5 years is a long time. It is a long, long, long time, my friend.
Yeah. All right. Well, Jordan, thanks for joining me. Do you have anything you'd like to plug? I suspect you do. Feel free to do that here before we say goodbye.
Sure. Yes. Baseball Barbecue is our podcast. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And yeah, I mean, just follow us on Twitter, and we do our Instagram live show every weekday at 11 a.m. Eastern time. And watch Dominican Winter League. It's $20 and you can watch every game. And we're tweeting about it every night. So if you want to get in on that fun. And by the way, the people are like, oh, the English broadcasts. Doesn't matter. Just as fun. I don't know any Spanish. I listen with the sound full volume because it is so delightful, because just the intonations of the Spanish broadcasts are more exciting than 75% of baseball of English language broadcasts. So, so I encourage that. Find some baseball. There's always baseball going on. And yeah, I really appreciate it. This was a lot of fun.
Sweet. All right, Jordan, thanks again.
My pleasure, my friend.